All right. Good evening, Washington County Budget Committee and SDL Budget Committee number 1. So Administrator Angie, I will turn this, I'll do a roll call and then I'll turn it over to you. So Karen Bolin? Here. Joe Everton? Here. Commissioner Treese?
Here.
Commissioner Willie?
Here.
Commissioner Fye? Okay, she's here. Chair Harrington?
Here.
So just notified that budget member Steve Pritzkel cannot be attending tonight. We are still anticipating Commissioner Rogers and Paul Lathrop as well, but we do have a quorum of 6, so over to you, Administrator Angie.
Thank you, Clerk Moss. And thank you, Budget Committee members, for serving on the Budget Committee this year. Your service is incredibly important to this process, the organization, and the community we all seek to serve together. And Clerk Moss, if you can pull up the presentation, please. Next slide. I'm supposed to be in charge of the clicker, so bear with me while I get the clicker. Thank you, team. So at this point, I'll ask our language interpreter to give some brief instructions in Spanish for anyone wishing to hear the real-time interpretation of tonight's meeting. And we are waiting for our interpreter to join, I believe. Is that correct, Clerk Moss?
Lucia, can you hear us?
It looks like she's speaking. I can't hear her.
Can somebody pick Spanish and see?
There she is.
She can't hear us.
Now we can't hear Nafisa either.
Please allow us a couple minutes to work through technology.
Anyway, during the roll call.
That's right.
Supposed to. Of course, I hope he caught the meeting is 5:30, not 6:30.
So, point of clarification, we do the Spanish interpretation tonight, but then on the county website, are there not other languages available for people that want to read about the proceedings?
So we will be publishing the packet materials in Spanish.
Okay.
Our website does have translation in other languages as
Okay.
well.
Great, thank you.
That's a helpful question to ask for a community that may be listening.
I've got my cookies.
No, we were talking about our questions.
Oh. Mine are kind of weird.
I have 40, he has 18.
You're both ahead of me.
No, it's not a contest.
But that doesn't mean I won't have more as we go along.
Good evening, Budget Committee member Steve Pitzel. Thank you for joining us. We are working through some technology challenges within the auditorium, so if everyone would continue to be patient, we would appreciate that.
We can't hear you, Nafisa.
Steve Pitzel, can you unmute and check if we can hear you?
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Thank you.
Ah, perfect.
Commissioner Fye, can you try unmuting and speaking?
Yes.
Okay. Great. I think we're almost good to go. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. Technology is truly our friend, and sometimes there's challenges along the way. So thank you again for your patience. So at this point, I'll ask our interpreter to give some brief instructions in Spanish for anyone wishing to hear the real-time interpretation of tonight's meeting.
Tanya, this is Nafisa. The interpreter
soy
came on
Leticia,
camera
la
earlier
intérprete
to
entró a
tell
la
you
cámara
that she's
decirte
already
de que
doing
ya
the
está
Spanish interpreting.
haciendo en canal de español.
Okay, thank you.
Ok, gracias.
And I want to extend just appreciation.
Solo quiero decir una apreciación
So her Spanish channel isn't.
Washington County team, if you can
Conda-
verify that.
equipo del condado de Washington. Ustedes pueden verificar.
We are still continuing to work through some tech challenges, so once again, thank you for your patience. To ensure that our community has clearly heard the instructions on interpretation, I would ask that our interpreter give again some brief instructions in Spanish for anyone wishing to hear the real-time interpretation for tonight's meeting.
This is Maria. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you for being here, Maria.
I am going to attempt to provide instructions for Spanish speakers. Para las personas de habla española, si desean escuchar la interpretación en español, seleccionen el icono del mundo que aparece en la parte inferior de la pantalla. Después de esto, seleccionen el idioma español. For Spanish speakers, please select the globe at the base of the screen, followed by a selection of the Spanish language.
Thank you. And at this point, I will turn it over to Mr. Munn, Greg Munn, our CFO, to walk through tonight's agenda.
I'd like to note Commissioner Rogers joined us.
Yeah, just to note, Commissioner Rogers has joined the meeting along with Steve Pitzel.
Thank you. I've been here, but they didn't promote me to a panelist. So anyway, I've been listening.
Great. Okay, so for tonight's agenda, we have a few items to cover. We'll first go into welcome and introductions and have an opportunity for the Budget Committee members to introduce themselves along with staff. And then we'll move into some basic committee actions, which include the election of the committee chair and vice chair and a review of the committee procedures. And then we'll hear the budget message from our county administrator, Ms. Angie. And then we'll have the presentations for this meeting will be broken up into, or for this session, we broke it up into two meetings. So we'll have our first session of meetings today that will cover the general fund and 3 of our 7 general government functions, major functions. And we'll have an opportunity for public comment. We'll talk about next steps for the 11th and for the 1st, for June 1st. And then we'll close the meeting and continue on to May 11th. Okay, so to start off with introductions, why don't we go around the room and just briefly introduce each of the committee members and how long you've been on the Budget Committee?
So I'm Karen Bolin. I'm a business owner in the great area of Aloha, and I am pleased to be on the Budget Committee. This is my third go-around.
I'm Joe Everton. I'm a software engineer here in Hillsborough, and this is my first year on the Budget Committee.
My name is Pam Treese. I'm Commissioner for District 2 in Washington County, and this is my 5th budget cycle.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Catherine Harrington, the elected chair of the Washington County Board of Commissioners, and this is my 5th budget season.
Yeah, Jerry Willie, County Commissioner, District 4, and this is also my 5th season.
Steve, you want to go next?
Oh, Steve Pitzel. So on SDL and lighting, and this is my first year at it. Retired from Intel. So here I am.
Commissioner Fye, could you go next, and then Commissioner Rogers?
Yes, yes, Chair Harrington. Good evening, everyone. Nafisa Fye, Commissioner for District 1, and this is my 3rd budget year with the county since it's my 3rd year here.
I'm Roy Rogers. I represent District 3 on the commission, which is the southeast quadrant of the county. I also am a small business owner. I guess we have about 40-some employees. I'm a CPA. I'm managing partner, and this is my 39th year on this budget committee.
But who's counting?
Yeah, who's counting?
Thank you. So on the agenda, we have also presentation staff, department directors, and budget office staff. In the interest of time, we'll allow each of those presenting to introduce themselves at the time of their presentation. Okay, we'll move forward with budget committee actions, and at this point, based on our past way of doing things, we'll turn it over to our former chair, Budget Committee Chair, Karen Bolin, to conduct the next few steps.
Thank you. So our first action is to elect a chair, correct, Greg? Elect a chair for the Budget Committee. Are there any nominations from the floor?
I nominate Karen Bolin.
Is there a second?
I second.
Are there any other nominations? Nominations are closed. All those in favor of Karen Bolin continuing as the chair, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Nomination is approved.
Congratulations.
I'm so excited.
Thank you. Really appreciate your doing it.
I appreciate it.
And the gavel is yours.
Oh, wow.
Should we get unruly?
Wow, now I feel really powerful. Okay, so the next item of business is to elect a vice chair in the goal of having some continuity from year to year. So are there any nominations for a vice chair of the nominations committee?
Joe or Steve, would you like to serve by any chance?
You know, it's funny. I was just going to nominate Joe.
Be my guest. The chair would love to hear you say that.
I nominate Joe Everton for vice chair.
Great, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Joe has been nominated to be the vice chair, which means he would be chair next year.
Potentially,
with that?
if he accepts.
If he accepts, that's true.
And if he wins.
All those in favor of the nomination of Joe as the co-chair signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those
Aye.
opposed? Joe, congratulations.
Thank you.
The next order of business is to go into our budget message, so I guess we're moving on to Ms. Tanya for that. Is that okay?
Yes. First, I'll just review guidelines for community input at
Okay.
this evening's meeting. Community input will occur toward the end of the meeting, so the public can hear and refer to the presentations and rich discussions that I anticipate your committee will have. There will be 2 minutes per individual, 5 minutes per organization.
Is there a hard time on that? A hard stop?
There is not.
Okay.
So at this time, I will deliver this year's budget message. Good evening, members of Washington County Board of Commissioners, Budget Committee, and Washington County community. I transmit next year's proposed budget message to you at a time of continued transition for our organization, our partners, and our community. A multitude of factors are challenging us in this moment, some within our control, others not. Some pushing us toward better approaches to serving our public, others pulling us backward from the level of service our community is requesting and that we aspire to provide. We are experiencing the ambiguity and strain of an emerging post-pandemic reality for our organization and community. A reality that gives us hope for the future, but is also interwoven with persistent inequities and risks. Our proposed budget reflects these countervailing forces and tensions, all within a context of ongoing financial challenge. Similar to the proposed budget presented to your Budget Committee for the 2022-23 fiscal year, this proposed budget for 2023-24 continues to address structural imbalance between its general fund revenues and expenditures. Over the last 5 years, the average annual cost of providing services has increased by 7.7%, while average annual general fund revenue has only grown by 5.8%. For fiscal year 2023-24, this discrepancy created a gap between projected revenues and anticipated expenditures in the general fund of 7.1%, or $25.3 million. A series of reductions informed by the Board of Commissioners' budget principles and priorities were put in place to fill this gap and ensure that the proposed budget is balanced. Although taking these steps will reduce our level of service to the community, they have also represented a significant step toward setting the organization on a more sustainable, stable financial path that delivers services equitably. I'm grateful for the leadership and service of our Board of County Commissioners and for their partnership with staff as we have been collectively coming to a shared understanding of our financial state of affairs and actions needed in response. As you will see, staff has approached this task with a unifying view of our complicated organization. This approach that we call One Washington County supports teamwork and mutually beneficial systems that make our combined efforts greater than the sum of our parts. Through the diligent work of every department and office in the organization, every department and office in our organization, and this was done in the face of a stressful and shifting financial climate, this balanced proposed budget is provided for your review and consideration. As our proposed budget will demonstrate, our resource-constrained organization is struggling to meet this dynamic and growing need, and has been for quite some time. Our community is multifaceted and continues to experience our emerging post-pandemic life differently. Our organization, on another hand, has limited financial capacity to address these needs over the long term, and much of our success is being supported by one-time or temporary revenue. More information on the magnitude of community need and the limited financial resources needed to address it can be found in the Trends and Initiatives section of this proposed budget. And highlights of these areas will be covered in your presentations through your committee meetings. The forces of change in our emerging post-pandemic world are being clearly felt by our organization, partners, and community. Although we in the public sector are making progress at reducing public health risk, narrowing disparities in our economy, supporting community vitality, we're also experiencing the strain of our financial capacity and physical infrastructure when it comes to serving ongoing community need. This proposed budget for Washington County reflects that tension. and it comes at a point of transition in our organization. We are transitioning from an over-reliance on one-time revenue, but our constrained model for more stable funding is leading us to these reductions, both immediate and long-term. Antiquated systems and processes have served us well for decades, but are now in the need of replacement and funding to support it. We find ourselves in a stressful period, a time when doing more with less must give away to simply doing less. That is a challenging prospect for an organization devoted to community service and employees that are devoted to that public service mission. Looking forward, I'm seeing a better Washington County emerging from this transitionary period. Although painful, this year's proposed budget is helping the organization pivot from its reliance on one-time revenue and toward financial sustainability. We're in the early stages of replacing key systems in our critical 24-hour facilities, systems that have simply reached the end of their useful life. We are taking the first steps toward retooling key technology to better support our payroll, human resources, accounting, and other core business processes. The budget itself has been restructured this year for increased transparency and fairness, while carrying our commitment to equity through the second year of implementing the budget equity tool. Each of these reforms will provide our One Washington County with a foundation of organizational strength on which the board and the community can build a refreshed strategic plan. Beyond this year's proposed budget, we will continue to support the board's community-focused strategic planning process this year, allowing for a wider vantage on Washington County's mission, scope of work, and priorities. The product of this effort will be the first new strategic plan for this organization in 30 years. The strategic plan will be the most important policy document for the organization, clearly prioritizing the board's vision and most important community outcomes to achieve and influence the decision of future budgets. This will include service level analysis, capital spending assessments, and of course, community input, which will all feed into the process, and some of this has already begun in the form of internal improvements and restructuring, which we commonly call at Washington County Design the Future. I'm grateful for the hundreds of hours of staff time and care devoted to the construction of this proposed budget year. And it started with our very small budget team in finance. Each step of the process involved some element of challenge as the team worked to guide the organization through reduction scenario processes, balance and rebalance each fund, and ultimately deliver the proposed budget before you. Our departments and staff across this organization simply are doing heroic efforts on a daily basis, and their work is shown through numbers in this proposed budget. Our communications and community engagement programs also rose to the occasion to support board outreach through their town hall events, as well as multiple information sessions with our employees, city and special district colleagues, and community-based organizations we partner with each and every day. And finally, I'd like to thank the members of the Budget Committee, including our own Board of County Commissioners, for your service this year as we present this proposed budget to you and seek to answer your questions. Your role representing community in this budget process is critical in shaping democracy and principles. Thank you. And with that, I will transition chair to Mr. Munn to cover the financial challenges.
Thank you for your message.
Thank you. So while we'll be presenting a budget that amounts to a total of $1.7 billion, we're going to spend some of the time initially talking about our financial challenges, which are very much centered on the general fund. So we'll talk about the general fund first, cover those challenges, and then we'll move into the other departments that make up the rest of the county budget. So the general fund is out of balance. We initially had a forecast of $25 million difference between our revenue and projected expenditures. And there are several reasons for that, and I think it's important that we highlight that here quickly. First off, as Ms. Angie mentioned, we have our revenue, which is growing at a much slower rate than our expenditures. There's almost a 2 percentage point gap between those two. Expenditures growing at 7.7%, while revenue is only growing at 5.8%. We've also had that difference creates a gap, and we've had an over-reliance on some of our one-time funds to fund that gap between those two revenues and expenditures. Other critical factors that have been consistent over many, many years is the increasing cost for our health insurance and also our state retirement system. Although we're starting to see the retirement system costs starting to flatten out as we move forward. Additionally, we have unfunded state mandates that come our way that we must pay for, find out a way to, we don't have revenue that comes with the mandate. One example that we recently experienced is Paid Leave Oregon. So the cost for us to facilitate that, to manage that program within the county, within all of our employees, it's about $400,000 that we didn't have a revenue source to pay for that. So essentially that ends up being funded through some combination of an indirect charge out to our departments and our property tax revenue. As Ms. Angie mentioned, we have failures in some of our facilities, particularly those around our public safety. And then we also have our key technical, it says key technical systems, but really it boils down to our ERP, which is our accounting and finance HR system. It's our backbone core system that's 23 years old and is past due to be replaced. We also have a constrained property tax revenue system that for a growing county like us, the revenue's growing at about 4.4% per year. If you're not a growing county, it's only growing at 3% per year. So 3% to 4.4 to maybe 5% in growth in revenue, while your expenditures are growing at a pace much faster than that. So the bottom line, as I mentioned earlier, is we have a gap between our revenue and expenditures moving into FY24 of about $25 million. And this is a graphic that shows a 10-year period. We've shared this before. The red line is our expenditures. The green line is our revenue going back 5 years from fiscal year 17 to fiscal year 22. The red line being the expenditures is growing. That's the number that's the line that's growing at 7.7% per year, with the green growing at 5.8% per year. The gap between those two, we've been using our strategic investment program revenue to fund that gap. And the challenge is not only that the gap, we're using one-time funds because that source of revenue is limited to a specific time frame, but that gap is growing over time. And if you follow that line out for both the revenue and expenditures, if you extrapolate those lines out another 5 years, you can see that gap goes from $43 million in FY22 to $90 million in FY27. So before we start talking about expenditures, I think it's important to have a good understanding of our revenue. And one way to break down our revenue to help understand it a little bit easier is to look at revenue whether or not it's restricted. So restricted revenue set aside for specific purposes, unrestricted revenue available for more general services. So on the unrestricted side, that's generally our property tax revenue. And mostly what that funds is our general county services, being our law enforcement, public safety, our assessment and taxation, our election system, public health, those sorts of services. The bullet up there that says competitive, the reason why it says that is because it's an infinite amount of funds, or it's a finite amount of funds. It's not infinite. So there's only so much of those dollars that are available to fund those services as we move forward. On the restricted side, however, those are generally dollars that we receive for specific services. And One example of that is our grants. We get a grant for, say, $1 million to perform a specific service. We can't use that money for anything else other than that service. It's about I think the next graphic, it's about a 20-80 split. See if I'm close. Yeah, the graphic up in the left-hand corner takes our new revenue that we receive in the county, which is about $1.2 billion, and breaks it down between restricted and unrestricted. The unrestricted component of that is about $230 million. So if you can imagine a total budget of $1.7 billion, and it boils down to $230 million of that revenue in the budget is unrestricted. And most of that funds services in our general fund for our core county services. And there's a list over here on the right-hand side that lists out what it pays for. I mentioned that a minute ago. But if you take the unrestricted revenue and break it down even further, it becomes a little bit more interesting in that a piece of that, or of that piece of unrestricted revenue, most of it in blue is comprised of our general fund property taxes. But a large piece of that, 43%, is dedicated to other specific services, being our transportation and our library system. So there's another graphic that will come up a little bit later. We can explain this a little bit more, but even of our unrestricted revenue, only a piece of it, a small piece of it, is really, truly unrestricted. Other parts of it are dedicated, and the SIP component you see in yellow is really limited by time. I think this one's yours.
This slide is mine. I usually am the one who presents this slide because I find it very interesting. One of the questions I commonly get asked by community members is, why can't Washington County provide a certain level of service that we find in Multnomah County or Clackamas County? In the 1990s, voters passed a series of changes in Oregon Constitution which cut, capped, and rolled back property taxes and established a permanent property tax rate. And that's what you see in the yellow. So the yellow column, and to orientate, if it's hard to read on the screen, Washington County is on the left, Clackamas in the middle, and Multnomah County. So we have the lowest property tax rate. To an option that local governments can do is put in place local option levies. Those you can see on the screen in the blue, and then bonded debt is shown in the green. So still, after serial levies and debt, we still have the lowest property tax rate within our region, even though we are among the fastest growing and have seen the significant growth. Of the 225 of permanent tax rate within the county, that does include the special option levies, the serial levies that were in place at that time. MISTIP and WCCLS are part of that permanent rate. Of the 225, that is 96 cents of that yellow amount. In the blue, for our special option levies, that includes our public safety levy as well as our library levy. Next slide. In the spirit of time, I will not walk through the board guidance, which highlights the board budget priorities and principles. Just of reference, they are included within tonight's meeting packet. And I would ask that our Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer, Ms. Latricia Tillman, join at the table, and she will provide a brief overview of our second year, just our second year of implementing a budget equity tool, and we've actually learned a lot this year as well.
Teamwork.
I did want to just begin with a reflection on why are we building
resolution. The board has committed to providing leadership to make Washington County more equitable and inclusive to all marginalized groups, and to spending the public's dollars in a way that maximizes the benefit for the community. So as you have heard many times, Washington County is one of the most diverse counties in Oregon, both in terms of race, ethnicity, as well as language. 1/3 of Washington County residents identify as a race other than white. Approximately 93,000 Washington County residents speak a language other than English at home. And of those, 46,000 speak English less than very well. Again, we are not the most linguistically diverse county in Oregon, but we are one of the most linguistically diverse. Also, in terms of income, we see significant income inequity. 9%, almost 1 in 10 American Indian, Alaskan Native households, and almost 1 in 10 African American or Black households have incomes less than $15,000 a year. And that is twice the Washington County average across races of 5%. So 1 in 10 versus 1 in 20. So given this data, I just also want to note with appreciation that it was the Budget Committee who asked that Washington County develop a process so that you can consider equity in your budget deliberations. And also appreciation for staff in the Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement and across the county for taking on the challenge to launch this new process. So the budget equity summary is included in the proposed budget. It begins on page 40 of your budget document. And the full equity analysis will be posted on the county's website as it was last year. The principles in a budget equity tool are also part of an equity best practice that can be applied beyond your budgeting process. So it involves making data-informed decisions, understanding what inequities exist and which ones our budget is intending to address. It involves transparency, being clear about how we're allocating our dollars, and how we are communicating our expectations for advancing equity. It requires community engagement. So beyond the numbers, beyond the data, what is the lived experience of our community and our community partners? What are they telling us about the needs, the strategies that need to be implemented and invested in order to address inequity? The budget equity tool also focuses on equitable access. So who has access to Washington County services disaggregated by race, ethnicity, language, and other factors? Quality, how are our services meeting the unique cultural norms, values, or social positioning of diverse communities? So not a one-size-fits-all approach, and you'll see in the budget equity summary several of our departments are beginning to invest in culturally specific strategies, so this is really exciting. As well as how are investments transforming the environments that create and sustain inequities. So it's one thing to clean up the inequities after the fact, it's another thing to invest in strategies that actually prevent them from occurring in the first place. And then finally, an outcomes focus. So what are the outcomes of your investments that you're deciding on in this process? What is the return on that investment? How do we actually know whether we're moving toward equity in the outcomes we're investing in or not? Next slide, please. So I just want to share a little bit about the evolution of the budget equity tool. Last year, we focused our questions in one budget equity tool for all organizational units that had personnel costs, so not just pass-through dollars, on civil rights compliance, data, community engagement, and quality of services, and then how are resources being targeted to address known inequities. This year, we evolved and refined the tool to maintain our commitment to civil rights investments focused on language access, but also accommodations for people with disabilities. Second, we asked that they focus on data to understand racial and ethnic inequities in access, quality, and outcomes of services. Third, because the board has adopted an equitable community engagement policy, we asked that departments not only focus on engaging communities in budget conversations, but also identify how much they're investing in community engagement efforts going forward. Fourth, equitable services. Again, as I mentioned, equity ensures that diverse communities can expect the highest possible level of access, quality, and outcomes. And culturally specific services delivered by culturally specific organizations are one best practice to assure high-quality access, service, and outcomes. These organizations are typically best equipped to offer trusted, affirming, and tailored services to diverse communities. However, beyond culturally specific services, we asked organizational units to identify how they would invest resources to improve outcomes for Black, Indigenous, Latino, Latina, Latinx, Asian, and Pacific Islander, immigrant and refugee communities experiencing inequities in access and quality of services, whether it's through culturally specific provider or through culturally responsive service delivery. And then for equitable organizational development, we asked organizational units to explore how they would invest in growing their own internal knowledge, skills, and ability and capacity for staff to assure equity. So workforce and leadership diversity, equitable access to training, and other equity-focused professional services help build equity, diversity, and inclusion best practices into all aspects of the organization. We asked organizational units also to look at their staff and leadership diversity or equal employment opportunity plan to help them determine where they need to invest in strategies that support recruiting and retention of staff diversity, as well as in equity, diversity, and inclusion-focused learning, leadership, and skill development efforts. So also based on staff feedback, we developed a tool sort of modified, truncated for internally facing organizational units such as fleet, IT, facilities, or administrative organizational units within departments that don't directly provide services to clients or have a direct touch with community. So their budget equity tool focused only on civil rights compliance and equitable organizational development. Next slide, please. So here is what we learned from our analysis of the budget equity tools. So first of all, just a couple of caveats before I talk about the numbers. This reflects a requested budget to requested budget comparison. Again, only 2 points in time. As was noted earlier, this is a brand new process, and just also want to note that we started the budget equity tool in not normal years, right? We are still on our way out of, I guess the pandemic is now over, but we started this in the pandemic with an influx of limited federal funding. And so when the budget equity tool trend develops over time, these 2 years will show up as outliers in the trend line. The budget equity tool is also developed through a parallel process to your budget process, and so we don't do a true-up between what the departments requested and what ends up in your budget or what ends up in the adopted budget. So with that, here are some high-level data points. Our culturally specific service delivery investments are slightly shy of $5 million, which is a significant decrease in the proposed amount of the 22-23 budget year. Our community engagement dollars, slightly more than $3 million. put on my glasses so I can make sure I'm reading those numbers correctly. Slightly more than $3 million. Again, this was the first year that we asked departments to identify how much they're investing in community engagement, so we don't have 2 points of analysis for that one. For equitable organizational development investments, the base budget amount was 1.9 million, so shy of $2 million, and this represents a significant cut also from last year's proposed budget. We also saw a decrease in interpretation, translation, and accommodation requested budgets. On the positive side, we did see a growth in the number of full-time equivalent staff who are in bilingual required positions. So these are staff who are receiving the bilingual pay differential who serve in bilingual required positions. That is an increase of almost 8%, so that's a really exciting development. And there are also additional staff who are in bilingual preferred positions who are also receiving a bilingual pay differential. And then we also have more bilingual employees who are not receiving bilingual pay. So that is a really significant improvement just in terms of how positions are being structured to support increased language access in Washington County. I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Tillman. Okay, so we will begin the formal portion of the budget presentation. I'm going to give you a few high-level snapshots of the overall budget to try to gain some context. It's a very complex budget. It's a very wide budget. It covers a lot of areas in the county. So this first graphic is, again, our budget is $1.7 billion. And budget year to budget year, it's a 4%, it's a very modest 4% increase. And the distribution, this graphic here, has changed very slightly from FY23. But what's important about this is that you can see that over half of our expenditures from general government down through culture, education, and recreation, more than half involve services to the public. Not all of general government does, because a portion of that is our internal service functions, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. But you can see a major portion of our expenditures goes to serving the public. 18% is capital expenditures, and then the non-operating component is made up of transfers and some of our contingencies. Again, the same $1.7 billion budget, but we're taking a slice from a different perspective, and this is the type of expenditures. So the first two major components there are personnel services. Those are our FTE, the staff that we hire to perform the work. And then materials and services, those are the contracts, the supplies, the utilities that we pay throughout all of our departments around the county. So that's a fairly large piece of that, and you can see then that the contingency up above, which was a component of the non-operating that I mentioned at the last slide, is 14%. And again, this breakout is very similar to what it was in FY23. So those were two ways of looking at expenditures. If we shift gears over and look at revenue, total revenue in the proposed budget is $1.7 billion. It's also a 4% increase from FY23. The distribution between FY23 and FY24 is very similar. And again, the interesting part here is that about a quarter, 27% in this graphic, is our beginning fund balance. That's in the upper left-hand quadrant. And those are dollars that are left over, we're projecting to be left over or saved for contingency or other purposes from our FY23 budget to our FY24 budget. About a half or so of the budget is comprised primarily of our taxes, intergovernmental, which the 22% there in the middle are mostly our grants, and charges for services. Those are the fees we collect for direct services that we provide that aren't supported by either grants or taxes. So I'm going to shift gears into the general fund. So we've been talking about the entire county budget with the 1.7 billion. This circle that you see here, the entire pie, is the total county budget of 1.7 billion. The general fund comprises about 20% of that, so about $350 million. And this information, if you're interested, you can follow along on pages 37 through 39 of your budget document. It's broken out there in a couple different ways. So before we get into the general fund in any more detail, I want to talk about our internal service cost allocation. So we began this year with a review of our budget process. This was back in the summertime. And we came up with a series of changes that we were proceeding with. We called it our budget process redesign. One of those was to examine how we funded and how we did our long-term forecasting for our general fund and how we funded our internal service functions. So this is one change of several that we'll be working on over the next several years that redesign our budget process. So with the help of Philip, our communications officer, he really helped us put together this graphic that explains the change from the current model to the model for FY24. So the current model for FY23 is on the left-hand side. The entire blue circle is our general fund. And in FY23, within our general fund, we also budgeted for and funded our internal service functions. A portion of those functions was paid for by a charge out to our special fund departments. So departments that are outside the general fund paid a portion of the internal service functions back into the general fund. But there was never a charge for the internal service functions to those departments that were in the general fund that were not an internal service function. So our district attorney's office didn't receive a charge for finance or HR. Our community corrections didn't receive a charge. Our assessment and taxation didn't receive a charge. So the balance that wasn't funded by our special funds was funded by property tax revenue. But the cost for those expenditures was not placed in those different departments in the general fund. So as we transition to the model that's in the FY24 proposed budget, we've pulled the internal service functions out of the general fund and placed those in their own specific internal service funds. So finance now has its own fund, HR has its own fund. And now those functions are being funded still by special funds. The special funds are still paying their share, but now those functions in the general fund that weren't paying before now have a line item in their budget to pay the internal service functions. So the general fund is still paying it, it's just being paid through a charge to those departments. And as we move through and talk more about the general fund expenditures in the budget, you'll see the impact of this change in some upcoming slides. So here's a graphic that essentially explains the functions in the grid here to the right. All of those functions were funded in Fund 100, which is our general fund, and those will be moved, are being moved, and are in the proposed budget in their own individual funds. So the Board of Commissioners will move from Fund 100 to Fund 514 and so forth. So this does a number of things. It creates more transparency for each of the individual internal service functions. So there's a specific line that finance charges throughout the county will show up as a specific line in budgets. So there's an accountability link back with finance. It also fully costs, this is probably one of the most important components, is it fully costs our internal, it pushes our internal service cost to all departments. So now, as we look at, say, elections, which is in the general fund, elections will now have a better idea of what it costs for them to operate. Assessment and taxation, the DA, sheriff, and so forth, because they'll each be paying for, out of their budgets, a component of those internal services. It's also a best practice for a local government, particularly one that's our size. And I think that's all I'm going to say about internal service allocation. But it'll show up here in a few minutes, a couple more slides. I think I'm going to hand it to you.
So I will walk through the high-level proposed fiscal year '24 general fund reductions. Within the proposed budget, there is no cost of living for department directors, assistant county administrators, and myself. COLA was limited to 3.5% for non-represented employees, and we are looking at a 5% reduction in our health insurance costs, which we will manage at the time of contract renewal this year. Using a data-informed process, we will save $4 million in vacancy savings. So this is looking at our general attrition of positions. At this point in time, it takes 85 days to fill a position, so that creates a $4 million savings within the general fund, and we were able to look back through the last 3 fiscal years to determine this is a number that we feel comfortable with moving forward this year. The proposed budget does include consideration of elimination of 22 general fund vacancies. I really appreciate the leadership throughout the county of really examining their vacant positions through this calendar year, because one of the successes of this proposed budget is it does not include any layoffs or furloughs of county employees. This proposed budget also includes reducing general fund transfers to the libraries and transportation. This is also known as WCCLS and MISTIP by 7%. And there are additional reductions that are outlined in the proposed budget summary on pages 15 through 32. Your presentations throughout your budget committee tonight and also on Thursday will highlight some more of those reductions. Next slide, please.
Okay, so as I shared with you the graphics earlier on the entire county budget, I'm going to go through the general fund in the same sort of manner. So we're talking now about the general fund, which is about $350 million, $346,658,558 to be exact. And what's important about this graphic here is because we are in the midst of reductions and a significant accounting change, being the change in the method for accounting for our indirects. It's important, this is a very important graph to highlight, but I would refer you back to page 41 of the proposed budget if you want to follow along with these numbers. But I want to highlight the spreadsheet here, the grid on the bottom of this graph, if you can see that. What normally we would talk about is the total change from year to year to provide you with some basis for analyzing the change in the budget. The column all the way to the right is that number. So the overall general fund is being reduced. The expenditures in the general fund are reducing between FY23 and FY24 by $23.4 million. And as you look at the lines above that, you will see different amounts and different associated percentages of change, which some are vary significantly. The reason for this significant change has to do with the accounting change and how we're budgeting for internal service functions. So what we did is if you move to the left from the right, we put in a column of year-over-year changes if we take the impact of the internal service function accounting change out. So essentially what it ends up being is the very bottom line there is a 3% increase in the general fund if you take the ISFs out. And you can see above the impacts of each of those functional areas in the general fund. One number that's important is if you look all the way to the right, the reduction in the general fund of $23 million. the amount of revenue in the FY23 budget, the current budget, that came in from came in from special funds to fund our ISF functions in the general fund is $22.5 million. That goes away as we move into FY24, and that'll show up a couple of times. That's the main reduction here in the budget, $23 million. Here's another snapshot of the general fund. More than 50% of our expenditures is in staffing and in materials and services. And again, if you look down at the graph or at the chart below, you'll see our personnel services are dropping by $42 million. Almost all of that is related to moving those ISF functions out of the general fund and into their own independent funds. And then moving to the next graph, and this is on page 43 of your document. Most of the revenue in the general fund, you can see there, the blue section are taxes, and most of that's our property taxes. And again, in the lower right-hand corner of the grid down below, you'll see a reduction, operating transfers in dropping by $21 million. Most of that, or actually it's more than that amount, but it's being offset by a different amount, but most of that is the revenue going away as the expenditures for ISF move out. So the $21 million that was coming into the general fund to support ISFs is now going to individual ISF funds in the budget, not into the general fund. That's the special fund contribution to pay for ISFs. Okay, so I'm going to transition to talk about fund balance. So the county's fund balance policy is to maintain a balance of between 15 and 20% of our net general fund revenue. The proposed FY24 budget based on that calculation is 27%. I'm going to explain that here. If you can look to the grid to the right, our current policy includes both contingency from the general fund, from Fund 100, and from our SIP fund. So if you combine those two amounts of contingency, we end up with a total contingency of $61,895,353. That compared to the calculation for the net revenue is 27%. As we move to conversations about a new fund balance policy and a new SIP policy, you've heard me talk about using property tax revenue, using 4 months worth of property tax revenue. That calculation is at the lower side of that slide. We have $171 million in property tax. If we take away the amount that goes to MISTIP and to the library, we have a net amount of $101 million. 4 months of that is almost $34 million. That still equates to 15%. So I'm drawing the relationship back to our current policy. So the short story is we have plenty of fund balance according to our current policy. And as we move into next year and arrive at a new fund balance policy, we would still be at the minimum level of our current policy. And we have an intermission. Do we normally take 5 minutes? Do we normally take a break? 5-minute break? 5-minute break?
So reconvene at 6:41?
Yeah.
6:41. So 5-minute break.
I'm confused why we remove,
Did that make sense? Did that make sense?
why we remove, MSTIP and WCCL. That.
It's on.
Catherine, there- budget committee members were looking for cookies.
I guess, Steve, we gotta hang tight. The time keeps adjusting. Must be a lot of fun going on in the room. You're on mute.
Just
Oh, there you
say,
go.
let's party.
Yeah, let's party. 1 minute. You should have just said 15-minute break.
Oh, wow. Okay. It went a little longer.
We should have, or 10 minutes.
I got a
It's just 10
sandwich
minutes
in.
now.
Mother Catherine.
Must be some people joining in the room.
Ah, okay.
Hello,
I see,
everybody.
do you see the overall camera? I see some people.
We blew by 5 minutes and
Probably
went
to
right to
testify.
10.
Yay!
Well, I thought about doing 10. That's why I was
Hi,
trying to
Roy.
laugh.
Are you annoying him?
Yeah, well, the
in.
time kept adjusting. It was 5 minutes, and then it was 1 minute something, and then 2 minutes, and then
That's the
so-
power of
And
Kevin
then-
Boss.
Good thing for us three is we just go to our respective
Everyone's so
bedrooms
excited to
after this.
see
They
each
all
other.
got to drive.
There we go.
There you go.
Okay, so we're coming back from adjournment just a smidge
I did
late.
see
so
some
thanks,
people
everyone.
walking in the room. Roy.
Can you hear us out there in Zoom land?
Can you hear us? Hello?
Okay.
Yes? Okay, so we're coming back to order, and we're going to go back to our friend Greg. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you. Okay, so we've talked about the overall county budget, we've talked about the general fund, and now we're going to roll into three areas, three of the major 7 functional areas of the county. That's general government, public safety and justice, land use and transportation. So we'll have a series of presenters come up and talk more in depth about each of those budgets. So would welcome up, I think, David?
Good evening. My name is David Martinez, and I'm one of the assistant county administrators. And I have the privilege to share with you a very comprehensive look at what we call general government. And as you'll see on the slide that's presented, general government includes both internal operations and direct service. And I do just want to take a moment and provide gratitude to the departments that helped create sort of what you're seeing, and they're present here today. So if I can have the leadership from County Emergency Management, Finance, Human Resources, Information Technology Services, Facilities, Parks and Services, Risk Management, Fleet Services, to please stand, so that way your committee can see who they are. We also have assessment and taxation present today, and Office of Equity and Inclusion, so please stand as well. And of course, the Board of Commissioners and our county administrator. So, general government is a comprehensive, you're seeing a comprehensive slide of critical county operational services and direct services. They can be found in the section pages 52 to 97. The operational services include the key functions that address county employees' needs to perform their role and provide services to the community. Facilities, for example, provides the physical workspace, furniture, and buildings, making them welcoming to clients and community. ITS, or Information Technology Services, equips departments with laptops, software, and protects internal systems. Fleet provides and maintains vehicles, ensuring they are ready for department use for the sheriff and for a road crew. HR is working on recruiting, onboarding, and supporting employees during their tenure. County emergency management, finance, and so on, areas whose day-to-day functions are critical to the county. Direct services range from the Board of County Commissioners, Auditor, County Council, to elections, assessment and taxation, Office of Equity and Inclusion, and community engagement. They're providing policy and strategic direction and provide confidence in county government and the upcoming elections as part of their role and their impact. The table on this slide, the table below shows the budget changes for general government countywide. So this is specific to general government. It's the countywide. And you will note the increase in general government direct services budget and FTE, and a decrease to general government operational services budget and FTE. So again, just to make clear that this is specific to general government, and those numbers reflect the countywide budget for these areas. Next slide, please. So providing a broad overview, the internal infrastructure of the county is essential to continued service delivery, sustainability, and responsiveness. Making strategic investments with grants and dedicated funds are important to support these efforts. Currently, 2 areas are experiencing reorganization, transition, and transformational work. Finance established the budget office, hired their first budget manager, and has been assessing and updating the budget process. You heard earlier about the ISF funds, and so again, a lot of work and a lot of change within finance. Human Resources has started the process to hire a permanent Chief Human Resources Officer, and an interim is in place to lead efforts to update policies and procedures to assess and make recommendations. The proposed budget for both the operational services and direct services include reductions ranging from 4% to 10%. This impacted supplies and materials, for example, contracted services, travel, training, equipment replacement, among other areas. The proposed budget includes the elimination of a senior auditor vacant position and elimination of an attorney position in county council. The proposed budget also includes an addition of a 1.0 FTE appraiser 2 that is reflected in the Department of Assessment and Taxation. This additional appraiser increases the revenue the department can collect for all taxing districts, including the county's budget. There's also an addition of a 1.0 payroll FTE to finance to ensure continuity of services. While impact to services is unavoidable, a strategic one Washington County approach was taken. And again, I just want to commend the staff and the departments for strategically looking at those areas that it would have an impact, but it would minimize and still continue to provide an appropriate level of services and support. Next slide, please. So this slide describes what you have heard earlier about some of the cross-departmental board priorities. This includes the strategic planning efforts that are happening within specific areas, from work with developing our first ever county capital improvement plan to the work that's happening with designing the budget process. The establishment of economic development, the work around equity, diversity, and inclusion, and our priority around the legislative agenda regarding addressing the unfunded state mandates. And this has been a priority that the board has presented and has really allowed us to really dig deeper in that area. And then again, the work around the COVID-19 response and recovery. So next slide, please. So this was a very broad overview, I recognize, and the intent was just to provide you a high-level view. It's an opportunity to ask questions, and we here present can respond, or we will take your questions and then come back with more thorough answers. But I'll stop there.
So does anyone on the committee have questions?
Commissioner Rogers has one on Zoom if you want to start.
Commissioner Rogers, do you want to start us off?
Sure, thank you very much. They have a good presentation. It's always difficult in a constrained budget to go through and to take a look at how one's going to provide services at the same time, exercising some fiscal restraint. I probably should have asked this of Greg and Tanya before I ever came tonight, but I will ask it of you, and you don't need to give me a message back. You can simply say thanks, and you'll get back to me on, I guess, on our next one. But my general observation, looking at the budget document as well as your presentation tonight, and you're not the only one, it's other groups as well, is that we're looking at what the county is, not what it's going to be. And it's not meant to be derogatory, it's meant to be a fact. And by that, I mean that with the advent of so much technology and such a changing technology atmosphere that we're facing, we are underfunding, in my opinion, investments in our IT system. What we're going to find is that it's going to be ever increasingly more difficult to find the sort of talent at the executive level, at the manager level. And I think we're going to need technology from a variety of different platforms to supplement that. And so, again, you don't have to comment tonight, but I really feel that we're just looking at what's going to happen this year, next. And I understand it's a one-year budget, but if you were looking into the future, I would be putting a lot more money into technology.
Thank you, Chair, or Commissioner. Was there another question?
Chair Bolin, I'd actually like to respond to
Okay, great.
Commissioner Rogers. Commissioner Rogers, our ITS team has adopted their first strategy that occurred this last year, which is a monumental piece, which really continues to position us to allow to evolve our IT practice. We are currently undergoing what is called Phase 1, a needs assessment to replace our enterprise resource planning system. Commissioner Rogers, you're absolutely right that we do need to look at not only what is on the market today in key technologies, but what could be potentially on the market in the future. Through this strategic planning work of replacement, assessing what we need in the ERP, we have really called upon employees from across the county to help with that needs assessment. The last data point I've heard is 3,000 needs have been identified from business process. What this tells me is that staff are really thinking about how we work now and how can we work very differently in the future. So I'm confident this will be one step. And yes, we do need to have those continued conversations as we look forward, even in resource constrained environments.
So one comment I would just add is one of the other new initiatives that was established by the Information and Technology Services was the establishment of a governance committee. And so this is a county-wide member governance committee that really is looking at the needs and the requests from departments from a one Washington County approach. So in terms of looking at the future and looking not just at one particular department need, it's really looking at it county-wide. So that's another achievement. And again, proactively looking at the best way to manage limited resources and really pay attention to where we're going.
Other comments? Yes, Chair Harrington.
So I sent in written questions prior to tonight's meeting, and I'm not going to articulate them here, but rather I wanted to share. Tonight was the opportunity for me to hear the budget brought to life, just like Thursday will be as well. And what I find myself having difficulty with, if we go to slide 37, I was bebopping between that and slide 28, which is the one that talks about internal service cost allocation. And I find myself struggling with the three collective terms. Internal services, general government direct services, and internal operations. So there's something about the labeling. I understand the concept around internal services, but splitting using that phrase, direct services, I think is really freaking my mind out, to put it bluntly, because only 2 of the services listed under there are not part of internal services compared to everything else that's in this box or this table. So I just wanted to share that this mind is having a little trouble with that part of the journey. That's all.
Chair Harrington, you're not the only mind. The
have
staff
company.
executive budget team frankly had wrestled around with this language for probably about 30 minutes, and this is part of, this is the first year of establishing the internal service functions, and now we need to look at some of our language to better clarify, so please wait for changes next year as we work to that clarification, and your point is not lost on staff.
Okay. I'm trying to get it.
So are we.
Thank you very much for your patience.
Other questions from the panel? Anybody on the Zoom? Steve, anybody? Questions? Okay, moving on. Thank you, David. We appreciate your presentation. Very, very good. So now we're going to have Aaron.
Good evening. Let me get set up here. Good evening, members of the Budget Committee. My name is Erin Calvert. I'm another one of the Assistant County Administrators, and my work includes the Public Safety and Justice portfolio. And those departments include the Sheriff's Office, the District Attorney's Office, Community Corrections, Juvenile Services, which also houses the Conciliation Services budget and team, the Law Library, and the Justice Court. And modeling after David's great idea, all departments are represented today. I'd love it if they'd stand up too and just say thank you for all the budget work and preparation they've done as well. Okay, so this graph slide, in addition to state and federal funding as well as grants, the other funding streams for public safety and justice include the Public Safety Local Option Levy, the general fund, of course, and for the Sheriff's Office, the Enhanced Sheriff's Patrol District. The Public Safety and Justice Functional Area FTE for 23-24 is 998.80 FTE, which is an increase of 5.60 over the last year, and comes from special funds, no new general fund positions, and has a total projected budget of over $264.6 million. The change in the percentage for the general fund illustrates what Mr. Munn discussed with all of you earlier, that the structural change with the internal service funds looks like a large increase is happening, but you'll recall that other chart that showed more of the true increase was around 3% for the total functional area. In the following slides, I will provide a deeper dive into the overview of the departments. Are you my next slide, guy? Thank you. The Washington County Sheriff's Office provides countywide public safety services and is comprised of 436 certified officers and 181 non-certified staff. The Sheriff's Office responds to calls for police services, investigates major crimes, manages the only jail in the county, and provides a range of services that support law enforcement and public safety. The Sheriff's Office partners with internal county departments, city police departments, state and federal agencies, and community organizations to deliver public safety services that meet the needs of the county's growing and diverse communities. The key drivers for the Sheriff's Office include countywide unincorporated population and the adults in custody population at the jail. In addition to general fund support, the Sheriff's Office relies on the Public Safety Local Option Levy to meet service level requirements for law enforcement and jail operations. The Sheriff's Office provides an enhanced level of service to the urban unincorporated area of Washington County through the Enhanced Sheriff's Patrol District. And when combined with the Public Safety Local Option Levy and the General Fund, it provides a service level of about 1.08 officers per 1,000 residents. The Sheriff's Office manages 5 additional funds for specific purposes, including court entrance security, grants and donations, contracted services, jail commissary, and forfeitures. Some important measures of effectiveness to note, and I'll talk a little bit about this a little bit later, is that Washington County is Oregon's safest major urban county and has the lowest rates of person and property crime rates. The West Side Interagency Narcotics Team, or WIN team, is addressing the opioid and fentanyl crises. We are fortunate enough to have training efficiencies that are realized with our Public Safety Training Center. And the evidence shows a decrease in recidivism when adults in custody of the jail participate in programs. Community engagement continues to be a priority for the Sheriff's Office with over 300 engagements annually with various organizations and at community events. Several key committees include the Sheriff's Office Latino Advisory Commission, the Enhanced Sheriff's Patrol District Advisory Committee, and Building Bridges. These committees and other engagements provide valuable feedback, create shared understanding, and contribute toward improving Sheriff's Office policies and programs. As mentioned, the Public Safety Training Center is a premier facility, and the Sheriff's Office remains committed to excellent training as a cornerstone of professional, safe, and compassionate public service delivery. The Public Safety Training Center fully supports all aspects of professional law enforcement training through dedicated in-house trainers. It also allows for coordinated hosted training opportunities for law enforcement professionals with specialized expertise, allowing more opportunities for technical training where local and regional partners can also participate. In 2021, the Sheriff's Office, with a team of national experts, completed a comprehensive review of all policies, procedures, training, and other operational administrative matters related to the use of force. Of the 71 recommendations, about 1/3 have been implemented or partially implemented through policy, procedures, training, and data collection updates. Work continues on the implementation of the other recommendations within the resource constraints of the budget. Next slide. As mentioned previously, law enforcement services rely on the funding from the general fund, the Enhanced Sheriff's Patrol District, and the Public Safety Local Option Levy. They deliver core public safety services. Those funds combine to provide the 1.08 officer per thousand residents in urban unincorporated areas and the 0.54 officer per thousand in rural unincorporated areas of the county. In May of 2022, Washington County voters approved the Enhanced Sheriff's Patrol District 5-year replacement local option levy for the fiscal years 23-24 to 27-28. To fulfill service level obligations, the Enhanced Sheriff's Patrol District levy, this budget adds a deputy position in line with anticipated population growth. No additional positions were required in the Public Safety Local Option Levy in this budget request. And general fund resource constraints led to the reduction of certified positions in the general fund, which does leave a gap of 7 certified positions to meet the ratio of officers per thousand population. Specialized teams with dedicated skills and training are essential to meeting public safety needs. These teams meet today's challenges and continue to evolve through continued learning, high-quality training, and partnering with county departments and other agencies. Some examples include the West Side Interagency Narcotics Team, or the WIN team, who are addressing fentanyl and drug trafficking. The mental health response teams, consisting of a master's level clinician that's paired up with a law enforcement deputy, and allow quick response to 911 calls that have a behavioral health component. The Sheriff's Office also partners with Housing and Human Services in providing a deputy dedicated to supporting houseless outreach and programs engagement, or HOPE, the HOPE team who support public safety and outreach in houseless camps. The jail. The ability to attract and hire jail deputies remains a significant challenge, with fill rates of 87%. This results in increased overtime and challenges in meeting shift minimums, which take a toll on the current workforce. This budget does include funding for marketing and targeted recruiting efforts to help optimize recruitment efforts on appropriate demographics. The jail has kept its adult and custody population safe throughout COVID-19 and continues to address the population needs as they are released. One initiative is issuing a harm reduction kit, which is developed in partnership with Health and Human Services, the Oregon Health Authority, and the jail medical team. This kit provides an AIC, or an adult in custody, naloxone, and other community resources and information to help reduce recidivism and prevent harm. The jail programs coordinator provides a variety of programs to help reduce recidivism, and these include cognitive programs, drug and alcohol counseling, employment services, GED testing, mental health counseling, and mentoring programs. The jail healthcare contract is the largest contract in the Sheriff's Office. The contract ensures medical services are continuously provided to the adults in custody to meet the community standard of health care that's established by state and federal law and court decisions. And those services transitioned from Correctional Health Partners to NAF Care in June of 2022. The Sheriff's Office budget reflects a 4% reduction generally and a 1.7% reduction in a professional services contract, and then there's reductions built in for vacancy savings. Next slide. The Washington County District Attorney's Office provides countywide service delivery and works with many law enforcement agencies in the county, including the Sheriff's Office, Oregon State Police, and city jurisdictions. While this is a great example of partnership, it is also one area of complexity in the multiple law enforcement agencies in the county that utilize different software and reporting systems, and that the District Attorney's Office, their requirement to store video and other digital evidence can become challenging. Annually, the District Attorney's Office reviews and processes nearly 12,000 cases. They obtain court orders for more than $5 million in victim restitution and collect over $35 million in child support obligations. In 2022, the DA's office served over 15,000 crime victims, including over 2,700 victims of domestic violence, 1,900 child abuse victims, 426 sexual assault victims, and 118 elder abuse victims. The DA's office, in partnership with others, is a statewide leader in the use of specialty courts and treatment programs. These evidence-based programs are designed to promote rehabilitation and community safety by focusing on accountability and addressing the root causes of criminal behavior, such as mental health, addiction, and trauma. Federal grant funding continues to be used to operate initiatives such as the Bias and Hate Crimes Multidisciplinary Team, the Veterans Treatment Court, and the District Attorney's Cold Case Unit. These grants are renewable each year, or each grant period. All of this contributes to some good news that I shared in the Sheriff's Office slide as well. Washington County is one of the safest places to live in Oregon with the lowest overall crime rate among Oregon's 5 most populous counties. However, as you may know, there are factors placing a great strain on the criminal justice system, and in particular, the District Attorney's Office, that includes various mandates and changes to Oregon law that do not provide additional funding to implement, but have a critical impact to the workload. The indigent defense crisis, the Oregon State Hospital timeline issues and federal order regarding aid and assist, the change in law for non-unanimous juries are impacting the jail, the District Attorney's Office, other public safety partners, and of course, victims and witnesses. And then, as mentioned, managing the digital evidence, including the footage from the addition of body-worn cameras by many jurisdictions in Washington County, all impact workload and don't currently come with additional resources. In addition to those issues, the District Attorney's budget reflects a 4% reduction, amounting to about $500,000. And then it looks ahead for additional vacancy savings this coming year, which brings the total reduction closer to $1 million in personnel and materials and services. This reduction was achieved by eliminating vacant positions and planning not to fill additional vacancies this year. The reductions will result in the closure of a reception counter that serves the domestic violence unit, the victims assistance unit, the misdemeanor unit, and grand juries. Additionally, this reduction will contribute to increasing caseloads and workloads for personnel. Washington County District Attorney's Office personnel have the highest caseloads in the Tri-County area. Prosecutors and victim advocates carry a caseload that is approximately 150% to 200% the size of their counterparts in Multnomah County. The DA's office also does not have any investigator positions as compared to the other metro counties. And while these positions have not been requested, just because they're not the highest priority in a challenging budget year, if they were requested, they would be assigned to work with the domestic violence unit to conduct follow-up on those investigations. The DA's office is involved in a variety of partnership, engagement, and equity efforts designed to engage the community. Some of the many examples include the ongoing work with the Building Bridges of Understanding event series, leading a collaborative statewide initiative to support the Oregon Diversity Legal Professional Job Fair, engaging in continuing legal and ethics education and routine bias training, legislative outreach, a hate bias crime multidisciplinary team, providing community outreach in multiple languages, providing a trauma-informed victims assistance program and support for U visa applications, and spearheading new specialty programs and treatment courts, as well as the sponsorship of the Hillsborough High School mock trial team. A key initiative of the DA's office remains supporting services for vulnerable victims, especially child abuse and domestic violence victims. The DA's office is working with a broad coalition of community partners and agencies to lead an effort to establish the Family Peace Center of Washington County. This initiative seeks to address the impact of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, and trauma as a form of transformative criminal justice reform. Next slide. Can I take a drink of water? I know, sorry, I'm like, oh, I'm going. Okay. Thank you. Okay, the Washington County Community Corrections Department is responsible for providing probation, parole, post-prison supervision, services and sanctions to justice-involved individuals, and they also provide residential services via the Community Corrections Center. To try to simplify a rather complex and complicated funding mechanism, the state funds supervision, sanctions, and services associated with the felony cases at a funding level that was established in an actual cost and time study from 2018, which even at that time wasn't reflective of a true funding cost for services. The county general fund provides supervision, sanctions, and services for misdemeanor cases. And then Class A person-to-person misdemeanor cases have increased by 50% since 2018. So both the state's chronic underfunding of the felony caseloads together with this rapid growth of justice-involved individuals system-wide has put unsustainable pressure on the general fund. This budget maintains the prior service reductions from the last 2 fiscal years and then increases it by another 4%. Prior budgets saw a reduction in allocations for evidence-based services, including recovery mentors, clean and sober housing, domestic violence intervention, counseling for sex abuse, and other services that are focused on reducing future criminal behavior. In this coming year, the Community Corrections Center will maintain operations for a 96-bed maximum capacity, which was the limit that was established during the peak of COVID-19, but will continue at this maximum due to budget constraints. The center's maximum capacity is 215 beds. This reduction will allow the department to eliminate the following vacant positions: 3 FTE, 3 residential counselor positions, 3 corrections specialist positions, 1 senior program coordinator position. There's some reduced indirect costs around meals and things that with less people, you need less of those things. And then eliminating vacant temporary staff. The reduced bed capacity at the center impacts the custody bed continuum in the county. And of course, the elimination of temporary staffing can impact shifts and overtime, workload, and staff burnout. Next slide, please. For the probation and parole side, the reductions include 2 vacant probation and parole officer positions, and then the elimination of temporary staff, and 1 case monitor. These reductions will impact caseloads and workload, placing average caseloads of the highest risk populations, which include sex crimes, domestic violence, and mental illness, to an average of 50, and general caseloads of property and drug offenses to an average caseload of 65. While this is right at the recommended caseload size, any change in population or an inability to hire could push caseloads above those recommendations. The Counseling and Victim Services Program continues to provide counseling services to victims of crime, members of our community, and clients under supervision in Washington County, and all of their counseling services are free of charge. Last year, I believe there was mention of the review of the statewide data and then our local community corrections data that found racial disparities in sanctioning practices. And the Community Corrections Department has worked really hard over the past year to understand and acknowledge this, and then work to better meet the needs of the Black population to reduce those disparities. Over this last year, they've partnered with local culturally specific organizations such as Coalition of Communities of Color and Going Home Too, and participated in rich conversations, took the feedback, and then developed an Afrocentric caseload to provide culturally specific supervision, mentoring, and services. And the department has had culturally specific Spanish language caseloads for over 15 years for Latinx clients, but the Community Corrections team is looking to see how they can develop more options for culturally specific services for the justice-involved individuals as there's a deficit of providers related to housing, mental health, domestic violence treatment, and sex offender treatment. The department has developed an internal EDI committee and a charter, and over this next year, they're looking at additional training, expanding the members of the committee, and working to deepen their knowledge and skills. The Community Corrections Statewide Association has partnered with Washington County's Chief Equity Inclusion Officer, Latricia Tillman, as the keynote speaker and facilitator for a training in June that will address and normalize workplace culture consistent with EDI values and initiatives. And the department is looking forward to themes and initiatives that come from that training. And lastly, the Community Corrections Department has invested deeply in staff engagement and well-being through the validated Gallup Q12 survey, because science shows that engaged employees produce better outcomes, adopt and implement new practices, and in the wise words of Program Manager Dr. Marcy Nelson that we've all heard, and the team, they have a better buffer for the costs of caring that are inherent in criminal justice professions related to burnout, vicarious trauma, and compassion fatigue. The department utilizes this engagement data to understand where they're at, and then they use it as a tool to focus on retention and promoting a workplace culture where people want to be and can contribute positively. Next slide. Juvenile Services has the responsibility to assure that any youth coming within the jurisdiction of the juvenile court receives care, guidance, and case planning, preferably in their own home and community, and balances their needs with victim and community restoration in the best interest of public safety. By way of background, Washington County contracts with Multnomah County for secure detention beds. The increased cost of these beds have been a growing concern for the department over the past few years. In an effort to reduce these costs, the Juvenile Department cut the contracted beds from 17 to 14 in the fiscal year 2021-22. Upon further analysis of the contract with Multnomah County, it was apparent that Washington County's detention bed rate was significantly less than the actual cost incurred by Multnomah County. An increased rate was negotiated for this next fiscal year, raising the cost from $367.04 to $477.01 per bed per day. To absorb this increase, Washington County agreed to reduce the beds from 14 to 11, and Multnomah County agreed to a 3-year contracting process, increasing the bed rate annually until the full operation costs are shared. So this will bring a significant expenditure increase in detention beds over the next 3 years, almost doubling the current bed rate. While the Juvenile Department is required to have access to detention, there are not a minimum number of beds they are required to retain. The department is moving toward accessing detention primarily for the highest public safety risk and needs. But that said, given the size of our county, we are not recommending that we move to any lower than the projected 11 beds of detention. It will also be imperative moving forward that we maintain a contract for overflow beds in the case that we have a public safety need for more than 11 beds. The department does have a small contract for overflow beds at Yamhill County Detention, though some of that funding was reduced to meet budget constraints as well. In addition to the secure bed reductions to achieve the department's 7% reduction, the department eliminated a vacant juvenile counselor 2 and a variable hour juvenile counselor 1 positions. All of those positions were vacant. This could impact caseload size and then some ability to backfill positions when staff are out on vacation or sick leave. These reductions, while impactful, they were prioritized over losing any current FTE or community-based contracts, specifically those that provide culturally specific services to youth and their families. The Juvenile Department's work toward understanding and addressing the overrepresentation of minority youth held in detention has prioritized being able to maintain the culturally specific programs that address the behavioral health needs of the youth with the most highest risk issues and needs, especially in the Latinx and other minority populations in the community through specific contracting. There's commitment to the continued strengthening of these services through contracts with bilingual bicultural providers for treatment and service programming, including for the Family Navigators Program and mentoring. One example of this commitment to programming is the expansion of the diversion program, which is funded by the Public Safety Local Option Levy. This will be the second year of the contract with Latino Network that provides services and interventions for low-level first-time offenders through assessment and culturally specific risk-based services to prevent further involvement in the juvenile justice system. Next slide. Conciliation Services provides court-connected custody and parenting time mediation through mediation orientation classes, voluntary mediation, court-ordered and voluntary counseling. In 2022, these services were provided to more than 730 community members. Conciliation is funded by the Oregon Judicial Department, appropriated by the legislature each biennium. This funding has not increased in a decade, despite the increase in staffing and program costs over the same time period. Last year, I talked to the Budget Committee and subsequently to the Board of County Commissioners about the funding cliff we were facing, as the fund balance had previously been subsidizing the increase in costs, and that we would run out this next fiscal year. The service decisions of conciliation are made in consultation with the Conciliation Services Advisory Board, which is composed of the Domestic Relations Bench, family law attorneys, and other members of the family law community, Washington County staff, and of course, under the approval of the Board of County Commissioners. Conciliation Services currently employs 4 FTE, which is about half of the counterparts in Clackamas and Multnomah counties. Any reduction in staff at this point would be detrimental to service delivery, both in terms of the wait times correlated to success rates and to the most vulnerable community members, including those dealing with domestic violence, addiction, and homelessness. The conciliation team, in consult with the advisory board, is recommending fee increases to ensure some cost recovery to sustain the program and the service delivery. 2 pathways were developed, and the one likely to be used results in less cost to the parties. There was agreement that striking a balance of keeping costs reduced for parties and generating revenue will ensure that this service model can be maintained and that services can be accessed by all members of the community. It is also worth noting that Washington County will continue to ask the legislature to increase funding to conciliation services. Next slide. The Washington County Law Library was established in 1926, and per statute, it provides access to justice by ensuring legal information, resources, and tools are available and accessible to everyone. The Law Library is governed by the Washington County Board of Commissioners in consultation with the Circuit Court presiding judge and advised by the Washington County Bar Association's Law Library Committee. These services are delivered with a small but mighty workforce of 3 FTE, a law librarian, an assistant law librarian, and administrative support. The Law Library also receives an annual appropriation from the Oregon Judicial Department set by the State of Oregon Legislature. As the state was still in the process of working through their proposed budget, the exact level of law library funding isn't known, but at the time our proposed county budget was built, there was a modest increase for county law library services. The Law Library team is working to focus their programming on education and outreach of what a law library is and what it does, and providing access for all community members. 2 program areas to highlight: the Law Library's Now What? Legal information series that aims to help people understand the legal system, including the next steps they would need to take for a specific situation. Their first program was, or is, So You Are in Probate, Now What? Future programs will explore other topics such as divorce or eviction, and these were presented virtually and recorded so that members of the public can access them when needed. The second to highlight is an effort to make law library services more widely available. Law librarians are available once each month on a walk-in basis at both the Beaverton City Main Library and the Tigard Public Library. The law librarians have helped with a wide range of questions, from tenants struggling with landlords to future law students just curious about what they offer. With flat and decreasing state revenues over the last decade, combined with the increasing costs of doing business, the law library has continued to draw from reserves to maintain current service levels and is projected to be able to do this through the next biennium, or June of 2025. Without a significant boost in revenue, it is very likely we will see reductions to services, staffing, and/or the hours of operation. Next slide. The Washington County Justice Court is the last of 4 justice courts in Oregon, established in 1915. It is the only court administered by the county and provides services in connection with both civil and criminal actions. The court is presided over by an elected justice of the peace. The Justice Court is experiencing declining revenues over the past 5 years due to a decrease in overall citations filed. There is a general increase in revenues from small claims court filings, and those are projected to continue to increase over this next year. This increase is due in part to the strict in-person COVID-19 protocols ending. Another source of increased revenue was a change to the distribution of funds paid to the state for traffic diversion cases. The staff at the Justice Court provide translation and some translated documents to customers speaking languages other than English. But even with the reduced citations, the staff time to explain process and procedures to customers, especially in languages other than English, have proven challenging due to the complexity of the work and the fact that staff can't provide legal advice. And it only adds to the workload challenges that the Justice Court is experiencing. They are working to have more documents translated, but the process will be a little bit slower within the budget constraints. We are monitoring these items, the declining revenues from the citations, as well as the revenue projections, and we'll be working over the coming months post-budget adoption to begin having these conversations again for the following fiscal year. Next slide. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Erin. So questions from the committee? That was
Commissioner
very
Rogers?
thorough.
That's a lot of words.
Oh, Mr. Rogers, I'm so sorry. Roy, what do you want to say? Go ahead.
It's okay. It's hard to see those hands. Aaron, a comment and then a question. The comment is this, that in reading the document as well as listening to your presentation tonight, I want to compliment the administrative office, meaning you, Tanya, and others, as well as the sheriff who's independently elected, as well as Kevin Barton, who is a district attorney, in not weaponizing this lack of funding. In many jurisdictions, when we get into these situations, when you have separate elected officials who have needs that are not met, they all go to their own constituencies, and we become very divided and very divisive. So I want to compliment all of you for making that not happen. My question, and you don't need to give it to me tonight, but I'd like it another time. I don't know who all is sitting in the audience. It's hard to know that exactly, but as we look into the future, and that's what this budget committee should do, not just this year, but on the other, and that's what I'm talking about, David, on the IT, there is no way this is sustainable. Absolutely none. With the number of positions that are not filled, the number of new needs that the sheriff's office is faced with, and then if you go over to the DA and what he's experiencing with cases that are completely beyond the caseload of Multnomah County and others, it's not sustainable. And so I'm not sure what we all plan to do about that, but it seems that at some point a discussion needs to be had. And I know that's not in this year's budget, because I compliment you all coming together on this, but I think a budget committee has a duty, fiduciary duty, beyond just what they're looking at, to look at the future. So are those ongoing conversations occurring? Will they be back before the Board of Commissioners? Will they be back before the Budget Committee, so that a year from now, we're not getting into some kind of trench warfare about, gee, we're really down now. I mean, we're not prosecuting anymore. We're not doing the things that we need to do, and we can all debate, and this is Roy's opinion, not others, and I'll stop with this, but you have an unsafe community, an unhealthy community. It doesn't matter what else you do. People don't want to live there, and they don't want to be a part of it. So this is, a big, big part of what we do, and we need to be making certain that it's vibrant and that it's funded. And so are those discussions, my question after all the compliments and the comments, are those discussions occurring internally, and when will they hit the board? When will they hit the Budget Committee?
Thank you, Commissioner Rogers, for the comment and the question. The simple answer is yes. There will be a lot more conversations, and I have actually started a list of all the things that we've talked about tonight that you've mentioned that need to be discussed more in depth, beginning really in July. I mean, really, as soon as this budget is adopted in whatever form it's adopted, the work is going to start immediately because we have to start projecting and looking into the next year.
And if I could add to that, I do want to give significant just gratitude to our public safety and justice departments. They are a pillar of an example of a one Washington County approach of coming together and really thinking about the system of service, because it is a system of service between between the departments. And if you pull on one thread, it touches a thread in another department. And so there have been initial conversations. We got a little, I'll say, derailed by focusing on this budget process to really look at not only what are the current but projected operational needs assessments. At the same time, there needs to be capital discussions, whether it is jail capacity and courthouse. So linking operations and capital in that future state planning is incredibly important through the whole system of service.
Any other questions or comments? Chair Harrington?
I continue to learn a lot about the public safety and justice domain. And I really appreciate all the information that we get through presentations throughout the year, as well as continue to do through the budget. I know I've written up some questions, and it's really a continued teaching opportunity, teaching moment for me, to make sure I know what I'm supporting and what I'm not able to help support at this time. So it's a tough budget year, that's for sure.
Any other comments? All right, Erin, thank you so much. Next up, we have Land Use and Transportation with Rachel. There she is.
Good evening, members of the Budget Committee. I'm Rachel Fuller, Assistant County Administrator. And just like my colleagues, I'd like our employees and staff from Land Use and Transportation who are here today to stand up. Not as many of them.
We have to go to work.
Okay, first slide. Thank you. Land use and transportation plans and permits, residential, commercial, and industrial development in the urban, unincorporated, and rural areas. The department is also responsible for planning, building, and maintaining our transportation system. Tonight, we're going to talk about the operating sections of the department, not capital, which will be discussed on Thursday. As you can see on this slide, most of the operating activity in land use and transportation is housed in the road fund. Revenue supporting the road fund includes Washington County's share of revenue from state gas tax, vehicle registration fees, driver's license fees, weight mile tax, which is how large trucks pay for their usage of Washington County roads and highways, and the county adopted vehicle registration fee and county gas tax. Other sources of revenue include fees for service, lottery funds, and some general fund. The proposed budget includes a reduction in full-time employees from 7 from 339.5 to 332.5. These include vacant positions throughout the department, including vacant seasonal utility worker positions in the operations and maintenance division, variable hour positions in administrative services, engineering, traffic, and survey. This budget continues investments in equity training for department staff and language translation and transcription for community. 2 department-wide EDI focus positions are budgeted this year. This is the equity policy analyst and the community outreach specialist. And staff are working collaboratively with OEICE to fill those positions. And while the road fund is primarily an operating division, as I mentioned, there is a small road fund capital program for ADA curb ramp replacements and other pedestrian and bikeway improvements, and they are proposed again this year. Next slide. So multiple land use and transportation programs are housed in the road fund. This includes department administrative functions, where costs are recovered from other funds through an internal department cost allocation. You've heard a lot about the county's cost allocation today, and land use and transportation has the same system. Capital project services division staff, when costs are reimbursed within the applicable transportation capital funds. The operation and maintenance division, and engineering, traffic, and survey. Also, transportation planning is funded out of this fund. Key projects in the next fiscal year include full implementation of the CityWorks asset management system. This system will allow the department to evaluate future transportation system maintenance needs, costs, challenges, and opportunities. This information will ultimately be a key input into the annual road maintenance program and the county's capital improvement plan, which we'll be discussing on Thursday. Other projects include an asset inventory and condition index, ADA curb replacements, and accessibility upgrades to pedestrian crossings, signals, and buttons. Cost escalation continues to be a significant challenge for both maintenance and construction. Adjusted for inflation, the state gas tax generates significantly less revenue than it used to. And you may know that in 2017, House Bill 2017 was approved, and that was a series of increases in revenue, and the final planned 2-cent state fuels tax and final planned state weight mile tax increase are scheduled for January 2024. Even with those increases, state highway fund and county vehicle registration fee revenues are projected to decline and remain flat or declining in future years. Combined with cost escalation, this presents an ongoing challenge. If the revenue picture unfolds as projected, expenses could begin to outpace revenues, and the division is planning for this and accumulating fund balance to provide some runway for consideration of options and planning. It's also worth noting that operations and maintenance has been challenged with vacancies and recruiting. So they are piloting a program to pay for the CDL training for crew members. This helps provide promotional opportunities and addresses hiring challenges, and also reduces barriers for applicants. Next slide. The long-range planning team in the Planning Development Services Division is responsible for community planning and transportation planning, and responsible for updates to the county's comprehensive plan and adherence to Oregon's land use laws. A long-range planning work plan is approved by the board and balances regulatory requirements, board and community priorities. The 23-25 draft work plan was previewed by the board and is out for public review and comment through June 2nd. The draft work plan includes mandatory coordination and implementation of state legislation and rule changes, and these mandatory aspects of the work continue to take up significant planning staff time. Key projects proposed for funding in this year's budget include equitable community engagement and outreach practices, which were utilized in last year's middle housing work, expanded language translation and interpretation services for all planning activities, including the first Spanish language online open house for the draft planning work program, integration of state mandated climate friendly and equitable communities, rule changes, development of clear and objective standards for development affecting significant natural resources areas, Council Creek Trail Planning and Design. Federal grants are the primary funding source. Countywide transit study. TV highway transit study led by Metro and TriMet, which is an effort to create community-driven equitable development strategy. And the West Side Multimodal Improvement Study led by Metro and ODOT. The community planning team is funded primarily with discretionary revenue, general fund, and video lottery, and was required to look at 4, 7, and 10% cut scenarios as part of the general fund reduction strategy. Their proposed cuts include cuts in materials and services for professional services, books, advertising, printing, training. There was a reorganization of staffing throughout the department to more accurately reflect where work is happening. And with these changes, the net budgeted expenditures for community planning are reduced approximately 12%. Next slide. So moving on to current planning and building services. Current planning reviews and processes land development requests, ensures land use code compliance, and provides information and assistance to community members regarding property development within the urban, unincorporated, and rural areas. It's approximately 240,000 in population. And building services provides full-service building permit and inspection services to urban, unincorporated, and rural areas, plus the cities of Banks, Gaston, and North Plains. This includes residential and commercial building plan review, permitting, inspections, including electrical, plumbing, mechanical, fire systems, manufactured dwelling, and on-site grading. Current planning and building services funds operate primarily on an enterprise or fee-for-service basis. And this past year, the division completed third-party assessments of both of these divisions. The assessment determined that fees have not kept pace with increasing costs over the past 5 years. And in addition, these divisions process fewer large projects, which generate more revenue. The Board of County Commissioners approved increases of 50% in fees for current planning and building services in February to reflect the policy of full cost recovery for these services. As you can maybe tell on these slides, even with fee increases, revenues may not fully offset all program costs this year. So we're closely monitoring the situation and will continue to develop options for consideration as needed. And that concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
So, questions from the committee members? So did you get any pushback from that 50% increase to the developers?
That's a great question, and I want to applaud the work that staff did to really stay in conversation with the builders and developers and bring them along. Nobody likes fee increases, but what we consistently heard was that the level of service was not adequate. And so one of the actions that staff is taking is to really make it clear what the service levels are, what they're planning, what their service level standards are, and then commit to meeting those standards. And that's really what the development community was asking for.
Well, I think they're asking for shorter time.
Correct.
Right. So they just shouldn't have to wait 6 months to get a permit, right? So
Correct.
the goal is to improve that. And they responded positively to that's the goal.
They responded positively to that's the goal. That's correct. The other thing that staff is doing is really working through the backlog. And they really did, and I don't have the exact timelines at my fingertips, but they really worked through that backlog of permits and were able to reduce that time significantly.
It seems counterintuitive if we're trying to reduce and make housing affordable to increase the price at the point that the builders are ready to build. So I'm not sure how we're going to resolve that, but it seems very unfair and very opposite.
Yeah, it's a complicated situation, that's for sure.
Thank you for your presentation. Any other comments? No? Good. Well, this was very helpful. Thank you. So we're ready for community input. I think, Kevin, you said there was somebody online that wanted to make a comment. And these comments are for 2 minutes, limited to 2 minutes. And there'll be a timer on the screen. Yeah?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Bullen. I did not see anyone sign up in the room. Did any members in the room wish to provide comment for up to 2 minutes on what you've heard with the budget so far tonight? Not seeing one in the room. Any members online viewing this meeting like to provide comment on the budget areas you've heard tonight? Give you just a moment to utilize the raise hand function. All right, we have one hand up, and it is Piara Rajinda, and I apologize for that. Can you hear us?
Yes,
All right, please go ahead for up to 2 minutes.
thank you. Dear members of the Budget Committee, my name is Piwi Runjinda, and I'm a resident of Washington County. I'm here to express my deep concern about the decision made regarding the allocation of ARPA funds on March 21st and April 18th. I was disappointed to learn that despite claims that these funds were allocated through an equity lens, they were used to upgrade facilities that were neglected for an extended period. This is particularly troubling, given that the funds were intended for disproportionately impacted and underserved communities. I oppose the county planned use of ARPA funds and a budget cut on essential equity initiatives for the budget year 2023-24. Furthermore, I was surprised to learn that the county does not have a capital improvement plan. As a local government agency with an annual budget range of 1.5 billion to 2 billion, having a CIP is essential to managing infrastructure and other capital investments over time and prioritizing projects based on community needs and funding availability. Additionally, a CIP provides transparency and accountability to the community by revealing which projects are planned and how they will be financed. During my previous address to the board, I spoke about the lack of priorities and transparency regarding this issue. It is crucial that the board takes this matter seriously and implements the CIP to ensure that funds are used effectively and efficiently. I understand the explanation of internal service cost allocation. However, the substantial reduction in funds allocated to equity-focused programs and services raises concern about the board's commitment to equity. It's difficult to reconcile the claim that equity is one of the board's top priorities with the fact that funding for civil rights, equity, diversity, and inclusion is decreasing significantly, while other areas of the budget are seeing considerable increases. How do you explain this apparent contradiction, and what steps will the board take to ensure that equity remains a central focus of its work? I urge the board to take action and prioritize equity by implementing a CIP and ensuring that funds are allocated to projects that will benefit underserved community. The consent agenda to approve the ARPA funding priorities is scheduled for May 16th. Since I believe in second chances.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I will send the document to you on by email.
Thank you for sharing your comments. We appreciate it.
Right. Would anyone else like to provide comments this time? I'll just give you another moment to utilize raise hand function. Not seeing any additional hands, Chair Bolin.
Okay, thank you. So we're ready to adjourn unless there's any final comments, and then we're going to meet again on the 11th. Yes. Greg.
Yeah, just a couple of things. I wanted to go over the calendar here that's up on the screen. So the next meeting is May 11th at 5:30 here in the same location. This is Thursday night. And pertaining to this specific budget committee, we are scheduled for budget approval of the budget committee approves on June 1st at 5:30, also in this room as well. The one other comment that I would make, it's in your budget committee procedures, a 2-page document that was in front of you. It's on the back of the second page. If you have questions, budget committee members that have questions that come up as you're studying the budget, as you're considering what you heard today, feel free to, it's underneath point 2, but feel free to email those questions to finance_budget@washingtoncountyor.gov. And what we'll do is we collect those questions and we'll collect them all together with the answers so that everybody gets to see them, sees the question and the answers. And in addition, on Thursday, there'll be an opportunity for the budget committee. We have another budget committee meeting scheduled for Thursday, but at that point, the budget committee, if you decide to, can conduct another meeting if we don't get through all the business we need to.
So we're gonna have part B. Or part two, I think you call it.
Yeah.
Of the
So we-
presentations.
So we'll continue we'll continue the presentations from today. And then at the end of that meeting, the Budget Committee could decide to continue and have an additional meeting if we need to answer your questions.
And we decide Thursday.
Thursday. Mhm.
Towards that end, though, could we go to slide 36? Yes, so in our next meeting, we have all those other pieces, and I know I've sent in questions already, some of which I've been able to keep track of answers that have come out tonight or in retrospect, looking at it, going, oh, that's a comment, it's not a question, that's a comment, that's not a question. But what I'm imagining is that for those of us who've at least provided you the questions in writing or email, that we'll have answers to those questions before the meeting closes on May 11th? Or?
Well, that would be our goal, is to have those questions. We just don't know how many of those we have coming in yet.
Yeah, okay. Because there are some realities of this proposed budget that I would like to see potentially some discussion. And so I mentioned this to Ms. Angie one day last week, because that's a pretty hefty list there for May 11th. So if we go back to slide 58. Thank you. Knowing that next week, we already have 2 different nights of budget committee meetings. I think what we're looking at is if we need something more, we would be looking at the week of May 22nd sometime. And so.
And that's for this group.
Yes, for this group. And so that's why I just wanted to give you a heads up to be prepared on Thursday night, that if we need to have another meeting, we're going to have to identify Thursday night when that week we would do it. So I just wanted to mention that.
So do you want to make a motion that we establish a date now, and then we can cancel it if we don't need it? So because there's people that aren't here tonight, and if we need to let them know, we probably need to let them know now. Motion to add another meeting?
Do you have any idea what nights might work thus far?
I would suggest we bring that information back on Thursday. We do have some ideas, but I just want to double check a couple items with staff before.
So maybe on Thursday, we entertain a motion to add another meeting. Okay.
23rd is our night.
Oh, well, we know it's not going to be Tuesday night,
Yeah.
the 23rd. So
Sounds like it's gonna be another Thursday night.
So it's either going to be Wednesday night or Thursday night, probably. So,
Okay, so we need to maybe plan for more time for discussion on all of these.
either that or it's going to be a wicked long night on June 1st.
We approve it and let the commissioners battle it out.
That you can do too.
There's always that. I think we do need to have discussion, and it seems like if we're having this and we invite the public to participate, we need to give them an opportunity to participate. So from that perspective, I think having another meeting just to allow public digestion and participation seems prudent. So, we'll take that under advisement, I guess, and establish a date next meeting, which is Thursday, for more discussion on what we hear on these different work areas. Good? Okay. Anything else?
Chair Bowling?
Yes, ma'am.
Also on Thursday, we will be bringing back just an updated committee procedures. There has been a question raised by a committee member on what would the process be if there would be an amendment to the budget coming forward from budget committee members. So that will be provided as an updated committee procedure on Thursday, the 11th.
So we're gonna have to do a date. We're gonna have to do amendment procedure. Okay. Busy night. Maybe we want to start at 3:30. Is that even an option?
To start earlier?
Mm-hmm.
Could be.
4:30? I don't know if this is enough notice. Who are the first people up? Housing, Health, and Human Services.
We know we could start at 5.
Yeah.
Because that's when we have dinner.
Push the dinner to 4:30. I guess I'm serious. Do we need to push?
Well, I don't know, we have 3 people on Zoom. This is where having hybrid meetings is difficult, right? It's easier for us to look at one another in the table and see our head nods or.
Chair Bolin, staff can accommodate a request to meet earlier, so I'll leave it up to you to facilitate.
I think we need a motion if people like that idea, and with the time. Is it 4:30, is it 5? We can eat our own dinner, we don't necessarily have to have dinner, but it just seems like if you're concerned about covering 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 work areas. So,
I move to start at 4:30.
4:30. Motion to start at 4:30 on the meeting on Thursday, May 11th. Second? Seconded by Jerry Willie. All those in
Were there any thoughts on Zoom?
discussion?
Yeah, actually, I'm fine with that. 4:30, it works for me.
Okay.
We need another second.
I'd rather have an extra hour than an extra day.
Yeah.
I currently have something at 5. But Brenda and I will work. If anything, I'll probably be 30 minutes late.
Okay. So, any other discussion on the motion to have the meeting on the 11th be changed from 5:30 to 4:30? All right, all those in favor of the motion to move the meeting on the 11th to 4:30 signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. So we will start on May 11th at 4:30 and hopefully be done before midnight. Yes? I see lots of nods. Okay. So anything else? We ready to adjourn? All right. We need to adjourn until the 11th at 4:30.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you for trying to work things out here. Good idea, good idea.
Like that? We can eat our own dinner.
There's other changes.
We're gonna need a lot more cookies.
Yeah, I'm off cookie duty. I think Catherine's on cookie duty.
Well, I don't think we can get the form. We can get